the beginning, the earth was a fiery place, and the land glowed red in the night, like an ember whose flame has been swallowed by the wind. Only frightful creatures walked abroad, creatures that man has never seen nor will ever see, outside his dreams.
I think they came from Africa or Egypt or another country long away from here somewhere.
Really, I think they just dropped out of space and crashed through the ozone layer, and that's what made the sun too hot.
Volcanoes, because they come out of the volcanoes.
I don't know what country it is. Bromley country.
I think what might have happened is they were just little ants, but what happened is they were special ants, so they went higher and higher every single week, and till they were as high as a house. In the end, they were as high as a big block of flats.
People used to think that dinosaur tracks were rare, and that's just not true. We're finding recently that they're just incredibly abundant, not just in the western United States, where we have literally hundreds of sites, but all around the world. There's been a real renaissance. People are finding lots of tracks in East Asia, in Korea, China. People are realizing that they're everywhere, and they've been overlooked until now. The landscape here would have been completely different from what it is today. Off to the west here, we would have had an ocean encroaching into this area, probably very shallow sea with virtually no relief. And then inland here, where you see all this white rock, these represent fossilized sand dunes. The dinosaurs in this area were almost exclusively all carnivorous dinosaurs, which is interesting in itself, but they seem to have been patrolling along a relatively barren shoreline. So you wonder what a group of exclusively carnivorous dinosaurs is doing in this area. What we have here is some really nice theropod tracks. You can see the three toes here, so it's going that way, and it's about 45 centimeters long, maybe almost 50 centimeters long. If you multiply that dimension by 4 or 5 to get the hip height, you're going to have an animal that's close to 2 meters at the hip. So this hip's going to be up here. This is a much larger theropod compared with this animal. All the tracks on this surface were probably made more or less at the same time, certainly in terms of geological time. We're talking about probably only hours or days at the most. Somebody once said that studying dinosaur tracks is the nearest thing to having sort of movies of the animals, because it's a very dynamic type of evidence. It's the evidence of the dinosaur when it was living, rather than the evidence of the demise or the death or the disintegration of the dinosaur. My main fascination with it is that the tracks are just so abundant, and put at a simple level, every dinosaur can potentially make thousands of tracks, but it only has one skeleton.
Amateurs in paleontology have got a very great role to play, perhaps more so than in many other branches of science. They've always made the majority of the important finds in the past. In 1981, 82, I came to the Isle of Wight, and I thought I would have a go at looking for dinosaurs, and I struck it very lucky from the beginning. And I made a number of fairly important finds back then, and sort of never looked back.
Very nice.
Quite clever clogs.
Nice dorsal.
There's one each.
Normally, you find isolated pieces of a dinosaur, a single bone or a couple of bones together. It's very, very rare to find anything like a complete skeleton. This is probably the most important single find that I have ever made so far. This is a skull of a half-grown iguanodon dinosaur. And this skull is probably the most complete skull of any kind of dinosaur found in this country to date. Finding dinosaur bones is a cross between an art and a science. Part of it, you've got to know what you're looking for. And part of it is an art in that you've got to have a knack, a good eye for spotting things, for spotting small signs or small clues which can tell you that you have something unusual. Dinosaurs were the factor that introduced Jenny and I to each other, and they are a common interest between us, going out looking for them. We both do like doing that. With Jenny, that's where the interest stops. In a lot of ways.
Yes.
Once she's found it, that's it.
But with Nick, it's his work.
Well, yeah, it's more that, yeah, it's become, in a way, a way of life. And it is a hobby that has grown into something a lot more than a hobby. I started painting reconstructions of dinosaurs after I started finding dinosaurs. Partly to get an idea of what it was that I was digging up, what the hell they looked like when they were actually alive.
You do dream of them when you first start out. I've dreamt that you're walking along the beach in a foggy morning or something and they come out the cliff at you, you know. And you just go to bed in the beginning when you first start out dreaming about them to find a major find so that your name would go down in history.
We're adding bits and pieces to the jigsaw of knowledge about the world we live in and its past. And in a sense, these things that happened so far ago are not that distant from us. The timescales seem inconceivable to the majority of people. 100 million years is beyond most people's comprehension. But in a field like paleontology, you can actually almost put your hand back in time and touch it in a similar vein, it would be almost like putting your hand out into space and touching a star. You're bridging that inconceivably huge gap of time and distance.
Calcium.
I don't believe in simply accepting the general opinion that there are no dinosaurs left anywhere in the world. I believe there may well be, and I'm determined to continue until I find something. And one day, if I do find what I'm looking for, i.e. a possible living dinosaur, then this will mean that I have at least made my little bit of contribution to history. The Liikawala swamps is 60,000 square miles of seasonally inundated swamp and forest. Now that's an area twice the size of Scotland. It's got a very thin human population, and there have been reports of dinosaur-like animals emanating from this region now for over 200 years. There's probably very few of these creatures left. It's almost like looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. To be an explorer, you need really to be a single-minded individual to be able to concentrate fully on what you're doing. You also, of course, need to have a spirit of adventure, which most explorers do have. And you need to have a bit of imagination. You must believe in what you are pursuing, and I believe in what I'm pursuing is the truth. Unfortunately, in between those gaps of adventure, you have to live a normal, dull suburban life in order to make ends meet and to plan for your expeditions. And I find that in between the expeditions, the dullest part of life is just being Mr. Suburbia in Gillingham and Kent. As far as my neighbours are concerned, if I said I'm off to Africa to look for a living dinosaur, I'd think I'm an absolute nutcase. And a bit of a weird, and of course, you know, they become very unsure of your mental health at that stage. So I try and keep it fairly low-key to avoid any embarrassment, not just for myself, of course, but for my family as well. My wife tolerates me. That's all I can say. She thinks that what I'm doing is interesting, but she herself has no real interest in the subject of pursuing possible living dinosaurs. My colleague and I, Mark Rothermel, who's a biologist, prepare for our expeditions by usually going out into heavily wooded areas. The most dense parts of Epping Forest and Bluebell Woods and Essex wouldn't be too dissimilar from the parts of the Liikawala in the dry season.
Is time ready for a rest and a drink, Bill?
Yeah, I'd say. We spend as much time as we can in open and fairly secluded areas in order to become accustomed to living outdoors in a much more hostile, tropical environment during the expeditions. Some rotting vegetable material mixed into this. That won't affect the test too much, will it?
No, no, no.
Okay. Mark is the most scientifically minded out of the two of us, and he concerns himself with the collections of flora and fauna, and also the testing of various supplies of water from which we will have to drink from. Explorers in the old days, people like David Livingstone and Colonel Percy Fawcett, the best known, the greatest of the Amazonian explorers, were people who were famous in their day as well as famous as historical explorers. And as I continue with the expeditions and continue with the exploration of the Congo, I'm hoping that perhaps I will get a little bit of a mention in history as someone who made a contribution to the world of exploration in at least this part of Africa. Sure try to make the tea by now. I made it the last time.
A sauropod. Imagine that this is the tail. So imagine in your, if you will, another limb coming down here, but this is the dinosaur tail. And the part that we're interested in is about there. That is the critical part. So if we take up the same position again, down of it like this, imagine now that I have a tail coming here, and my hand is doing, I can actually get under, twist my tail, she can twist her tail, and we can get the two cloaca into direct, correct position.
Good morning, Miss Warren. Why, what's the matter?
Dr. Huxley is thinking.
Alice, I think this one must belong in the tail.
Nonsense. You tried it in the tail yesterday and it didn't fit.
Oh, yes, that's right. I did, didn't I?
Paleontologists are always struggling against time in a number of ways. Most paleontologists would recognize they've got too much to do and not enough time to do it in. If the average working life of a paleontologist is 50 years, that's not a lot of time to come to terms with 4.5 billion years worth of history. It's a mystery for which the answer will be revised time and time again. So you're always coming up. To a large extent, you're coming up with the best answer available at the time, and you might be wrong. In 1841, Richard Owen recognized something which, to a large extent, is taken for granted now, which was that these were different animals. Their leg structure was different from other reptiles. They were large, they were on a scale that hadn't previously been recognized, and they formed, as he saw it, a natural group. But in fact, what was described as one dinosaur 20 years ago might now be recognized as something else, because we now have more information about it. If you look at the work that Mantell did with Iguanodon, when he did his little thumbnail sketch of it, he put what he reckoned to be a horn on its nose. And it was only about 50 years later, when a whole group of Iguanodons were found in Belgium, that there were enough specimens complete enough to recognize that that horn on the nose was actually a thumb spike. So, yes, Mantell got it wrong, and later workers got it right. But there were other things that went into the later reconstructions of Iguanodon, which have been corrected since, and so it goes on. Each piece of work is refining what somebody else did before. We don't have all the answers. We don't know everything that there is to know about dinosaurs. We extrapolate from what we've found. Sometimes we speculate a bit because there are things we haven't found. And I think there's a lot of imagination that's necessary as well in order to get over that step of having to contemplate something which existed for which there is nothing left today. There's no living representative. You have to imagine that it's possible that this could have happened. It's a jigsaw puzzle with no pictures. It's all sky. There's no corners. And just when you think you've got it right, somebody might come along and point out that, in fact, you're wrong.
I got my start loving dinosaurs from one piece of superb dino journalism, a Life magazine. When I sat down at my grandfather's house with this one Life magazine, has Brontosaurus on the cover, guy with a long neck, Stegosaurus, Colorado State dinosaur, and inside was a long, long article, beautifully written, with fold-outs. What I like about this, even now, is the pictures work as a storytelling agent with the text. And I thought to myself, this is the greatest story you could ever get interested in. This is the greatest story written, and it's written in the rocks, and I could grow up and study those things. So I did. Okay, this is a kitchen. It's also a dinosaur lab, since I tend to think about dinosaurs nearly all the time in different contexts. It's fun to have a place where you can just go down the middle of the night and think about dinosaur ribs or, the feet. I love feet. These feet, this foot, that's the entire hind leg to the smallest plant-eating dinosaur ever found in the world. They were all found in a burrow. The first evidence of dinosaurs digging and living in a burrow, raising their kids in a burrow, dying in a burrow, getting preserved in a burrow. But you can't understand dinosaurs unless you take alligators apart. I recommend this. Take alligators and chickens apart. This is Edgar, my pet alligator. It's not dead, it's only sleeping. This is a gift from a lab tech in Ward's Natural History Establishment in upstate New York. The wonderful thing about bones is they're extremely eloquent. They're very faithful witnesses if you know what questions to ask them. So if I had a fossil foot, like the foot we just saw, what I ask the foot is, where are your tendons, where are your muscles, where are your joints? How does the foot answer? The foot says, look at a gator. So I take apart the gator and map the position of those muscles and tendons and ligaments. Each of those pieces of tissue leave a mark on the bone. I go back to my bones there. I'm in the process of putting that hind foot of the dinosaur together so I can do this. So muscles can fire, the ligaments can hold the joint together. When I see a skeleton in a museum, whether it's large or small, I want to touch it. Because, here's another brontosaur bone. The texture of a dinosaur bone, and you can see it if the light's right, and you're not allowed to touch it. Touching is better. The texture of a dinosaur bone really communicates that this was truly alive. Every pit I'm feeling now is a hole left by capillary. When this baby brontosaur was alive, every one of those holes was filled with pulsating blood. It's as if you can feel the blood pressure of an extinct animal. And if you do that for dinosaurs, it's not just intuitive. This texture means that this animal grew like a hot-blooded animal. There's a lot of class bias, if I can use that metaphor. Class warfare in the way paleontology has been described. We're the class mammalia, warm-blooded, hot-blooded, hairy animals, furry animals. The older philosophers believed the mammals were the ruling class, the highest level of God's creation. And dinosaurs, if they were just big reptiles, were a lower class, cold-blooded class. And reptiles would look down upon. You know, there's a lot wrong with that view. Reptiles, cold-blooded reptiles, are doing fine. Nothing wrong with being cold-blooded. But dinosaurs weren't part of that. The way they evolved and the way they died was a hot-blooded way. Dinosaurs are inexhaustible. Dinosaurs weren't one thing, they weren't one age, they weren't one family of species. There were tens of thousands of dinosaur species. And they inhabited a world where there were hundreds of thousands of other species. There's an immense amount to do, many billion lifetimes of work to do. The more we understand, the more we realize that we're just beginning to tap in to the questions, let alone the answers.
Our picture of dinosaurs, and a damn silly one it is too, is as lords of creation, but lords that have failed. And we can get a great deal of comfort and pride out of the fact that they failed, but we've made it. The one thing we learn more than anything from the dinosaurs and their extinction is the fact that no species on this planet has tenure. There's little doubt that the dinosaurs' extinction came about as the result of the impact on the Earth of an asteroid made of rock or iron or something about 10 kilometers in diameter. Doesn't sound very large, but the energy released on such an impact is as great as 1,000 times that would be produced by the explosion of all of the nuclear weapon stocks there are in the world today. Probably what knocked off the dinosaurs was not the impact itself, but the damage it did to the whole system, which caused the global temperature to rise by about 10 degrees Celsius, an enormous climatic change which must have stressed everything and made it very difficult for the different groups of species to survive. Asteroidal impacts happen frequently. About a big one hits the Earth something in the order of once every 30 million years, which is not a long time geologically. But if you're thinking about it personally, don't lose any sleep over it. It's one of the least of the problems that face us. Quite seriously, I feel that we as a species are very much at risk at the moment from our own actions on the planet. Our view of dinosaurs, I think, is rather similar to that of an old man like me's view of the demise of his contemporaries. Old people tend to look at the obituary columns of newspapers with a certain kind of glee. Oh, so-and-so's just copped it. Remarkable. And I think we look back on the dinosaurs in just the same kind of way. So they didn't make it. Big and powerful though they were, they didn't make it. We've made it. But of course it's so silly, really, because nobody makes it. It's all transient anyway. And they made it a lot longer than we've done so far. The fascination with extinction, I'm sure, has something to do with one's personal views about one's life and death. And I begin to wonder, could this be true not only at the personal level, but for all of us humans? Are we now becoming so fascinated with the dinosaurs, looking on them as our predecessors, which of course they were not, because we know that our own doom is just around the corner?
The dinosaurs.
We could take the DNA and inject it into cells from an animal that'll be related to a dinosaur.
And how could we control the forces we unleash?
Here's the claw of the Utah raptor, a very savage animal slashing his prey to death.
The movie may shock you, the reality will terrify you. Equinox tomorrow at 7 on 4.